Chris has played and made video games his whole life. Most of his career, about 15 or 16 years, he was a chief gaming officer and chief evangelist at Sun Microsystems. And that meant that Chris helped really invent things like Java as a platform for games, build communities and technologies around games. So he's really a person who is deep at in the heart of the game industry, at the intersection of design, technology, and culture. And that is presumably one of the most important reasons that the Smithsonian Museum decided to bring him in as the chief curator for their history-making exhibition on video games, which is what Chris is going to talk about tonight. So I'll let Chris introduce himself a little bit more and talk to you about his history. Chris is going to talk for a bit. We're going to chat a little bit, and then I'm going to open it up for questions with all of you. So please help me in welcoming Chris Melissinos. Chris Melissinos? I pronounced it right.
Especially if you're Greek. That's good. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Let's see if I can do that. How about that? All right. Well, that's a good introduction. Again, thanks everyone for coming out. I was telling Eric before, I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up in Flushing, Queens, so it's always nice to come back up here. Oh, there's Flushing representatives in the house? All right, very good. I grew up literally on the same street as PS 107, and I could see Flushing Cemetery from my house, which was, I don't know why I'm telling you that, but it was just a fact about me. And so I love coming up here to New York. New York, San Francisco, my two favorite places in the country. So, and oddly enough, on both coasts and huge hubs for game development, surprise, surprise. So we're going to talk a bit today about my background and kind of what's happening with video games in popular culture today. Why are so many people playing games? What, really, where did it kind of all start? What are the reasons where all of a sudden it seems everyone's playing? And then kind of how that led into the discussion around video games as art and what we did at the Smithsonian. And there we go. So, all right. Oh, and by the way, being ADD as well, and this doesn't have presenter slides, this is as much a discovery for me as it will be for you. So if I go, oh yeah, no, this one thing, it's because I forgot what I put in here. So it'll be, very surprising for me. So this is just a little bit about me. So this is what happens when your family across the pond has access to Facebook and a shoebox full of photos of you. And she did. My stepsister decided to put that up. That's me at about 10, playing something apparently I'm very excited about.
Mattel Classic Football.
It was one of those things. We always had these things floating around, and they never stayed together very long because I would always take them apart to figure out how they moved. I used to have this thing called Blip, which was a Pong game, but it was mechanical, and had an LED that would light. And the ball, you could figure it out in a few minutes, the trajectory. So I'm like, well, I got to figure out how this mystery box works. And then my mom yelled at me because it never went back together properly. That's my 40th birthday cake. And my wife and I went to the bakery, and she said, what do you want in the cake? And I like an Atari logo. And she's like, really? I mean, for real? The woman behind the counter goes, do you mean this? Pulls out a piece of paper and draws the logo. And I go, he's a gamer. And she's like, so I'm the owner of the bakery, and I'd like to do your cake. I'm like, cool, no problem. So she does this digital font, and when we went to pick up the cake, she had gone out to the web and found the bitmaps for the dragons from Adventure, the characters from Miss Pac-Man, all these different games, and she actually drew them all in icing all the way around the cake. It was a total surprise. She's like, it was the best cake I've ever made. She had so much fun doing this thing. But the point of that is that when we talk about who is a gamer, it's impossible to understand today because we all are. Right? And so what I'm going to talk a bit about is how we kind of self-identified as gamers and what that really meant, what is we were actually trying to say. Last thing for you here, how many people, their first introduction to video games was PlayStation 1 era? Okay, how many were the Super Nintendo era? Okay, and then how many below that? Okay, so for those of you, how many remember the Sega Genesis? Remember the Genesis? Awesome games, does what Nintendo don't. And do you remember a system called the 32X? Do you know what this was? Okay, there's the guy. So it was one person does it. So no, don't be embarrassed. It's good, and I'll explain why. So that is a system that I built at home. what happened was Sega was, they were in the throes of this fight between technology and games. And so much of advertising discussion about video games in the era of the Genesis were really about how many bits it was. And they even started creating their own terminology like, blast processing and megabits, which were really just going down to bytes is what they were talking about. But anyway, they had this system called a 32X, and you were supposed to plug it into a Genesis, and then the Genesis would be able to play all these arcade games. And then they had a system they were going to make called the Neptune. And the Neptune was supposed to have both of these sandwiched together. And they never made it. They released the Saturn. I built the Neptune. So I gutted a 32X, I gutted a Genesis, I hardwired them down at the system level and put them back into a single casing. So I put a video of this up on YouTube, and people are like, what? And a friend of mine worked on the 32X platform at Sega, and I called him up and I said, Joe, check this out. So I send him the video link, and he looks at it and he calls me back and he goes, first, amazing. Amazing that it even works. Secondly, why would you waste so much of your freaking time doing something so stupid? Like, because you didn't do it. It had to be made. So we made a Genesis, and then, or a Neptune. And those are some of the systems out of my collection that are now sitting at the Smithsonian. So I've had a very long history. I started programming at the age of 9. I wrote my first full game by the time I was 12. Half of it was written in assembly, and it's all self-taught, and it's Space Debris, and you've never played it, but it's awesome. The 5 people that have played it agree. So throughout the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to experience a whole lot with regard to the formation of the industry and the people that created it. So I want to share a little video clip with you. So how many people know who Ralph Baer is? No? Okay, there's 2. So Ralph Baer is the man who invented home video games. He was a defense contractor up in Massachusetts, and he had the original idea for building video games back in the mid-1950s. He didn't actually create the prototype until the late 1960s. So this is a video of me playing against Ralph in his house on the original 1965 prototype that now sits in permanent archive at the American History Museum in Washington.
Are you already rolling in?
Yep, we're already.
Okay.
He invented Simon, he invented talking greeting cards, he invented video pinball. Guy's just an incredible inventor. And halfway through the day, he said, he's like, I need 20 minutes alone because you're wearing me out. So that is the very first home video game machine ever made. And it still works, so it's pretty awesome. And every time I show this video, especially when I go to like elementary schools or middle schools, they go, why did you beat that old man at his game? I'm like, I didn't mean to. I really, see? And I'm like, oh, so I'll stop it there. And I'll share one other story, and I tend to do this a lot too. I completely lost my train of thought. See, I told you this would happen. So has anyone ever been to Video Games Live before? You know what this is? Concert series, right? Ralph Baer is typically brought up on screen to talk to the audience. And Tommy Tallarico, the host of this, and we're going to talk a bit about that later, he shows everyone, this is Ralph Baer, the man who invented video games. Everyone applaud. And he was down at the Strathmore in Maryland at the time that the exhibition was going. And so he's like, you need to come on stage and we'll do this big thing. And we'll talk to Ralph. And so Ralph and I had been exchanging emails and just kind of lost track of each other. And so here's, 5,000 people, 6,000 people in this massive venue. And Ralph Baer comes up, and I come out there, and Tommy goes, Ralph, look, it's Chris. And I'm like, hey, Ralph. And he goes, hey, Chris, I've been trying to email you. And I'm like, oh, I know, I'm sorry. And he's like, hey, how's it going? And so he starts talking to me like, hey, we really need to get together, and we should talk about some patent stuff I'm working on, and this and that. And Tommy's like, we're in the middle of this show. You guys want to have your powwow later? That's cool. So he's a brilliant, brilliant man. So as I said, I started programming on my Commodore VIC-20. I don't know why my VIC didn't come up there. There it is.
Why buy just a video game?
And this is the man that used to pimp it.
Invest in the wonder computer of the 1980s for under $300. The Commodore VIC-20. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. With the Commodore VIC-20, the whole family can learn computing at home.
What?
Great games, too.
What?
Under $300, the wonder computer of the 1980s, the Commodore VIC-20. Coming soon, Commodore brings you Gorf, the wonder arcade game, and Omega Race in home versions.
We lost our minds when we saw that, by the way. Omega Race, it's like, it's a vector game, but it's not vectors. How are they doing it? The point of this slide is, I started programming on these machines, and the VIC-20 had 5K of RAM. It had 3,193 bytes of addressable memory after you booted it. So it is roughly 18 times smaller than the Firefox icon in OS X, and Defender is 1/8 the size of that icon. And this is all the space in which we had to write these games and really transfer to the machine our thoughts, right? And try to understand how to build these platforms. What was so important about, I think, for so many of us that grew up during that era, was for all intents and purposes, video games should not have existed, right? They sat adjacent to our physical world. They were literally windows into an alternate universe. And you could affect things behind the glass, but you could never touch them. You couldn't exist in this space, but there was a dialogue that was occurring there. But the problem was we lacked vocabulary to describe what it is we were thinking, what it is we were feeling. And as a result of learning to program, the rest of my studies and everything just took a nosedive, because I wanted to understand everything this machine had to offer me and how I could bend it to my will and make it do things. And so what I explain to people is that for kids growing up in that era, it was empowerment. I mean, it was literally empowerment. I'm a big fan of movie quotes too, and looking at like Pirates of the Caribbean, and when Jack Sparrow's talking about his boat, he's like, it's not a hull and a sail and wood, it's freedom. That's what the Black Pearl represents, freedom. That's exactly what these machines did for us. It was freedom. It was control in a world that we had no control of. Right? We're told what to eat, when to go to bed, who to play with, when to do homework. But in the computer, we could be whatever we wanted. We could create whatever we wanted. It was incredibly powerful and intoxicating. And nobody knew why. Nobody knew why, right? Parents thought it was a fad. The market thought that video games were a fad, right? It was this thing that was going to collapse. But those of us that grew up in there understood it was more than we could articulate. And so how I like to define our era is bit babies. So we were the first kids that grew up with computers in the home. We were the first ones that were willing to appropriate them into our lives, understand that there was more to the machine than our parents gave credit for. And take a look at this incredible, look at that Armatron with kids in lab coats doing something with a robotic arm. That was amazing. Big Track, how many people know what Big Track is? Eric does, great. So Big Track is a tank with a keypad on it, and you would literally program it and go forward 10, and it would go forward 10 feet, and you turn left, 45, forward 5. And you'd spend like an hour and a half programming this thing, and it would make a square in the room. You're like, it's robots! Oh my God, it's amazing! They even had this piece you put on the back, and the commercial was that the kid put an apple in it, and it went to his dad in the living room and dumped the apple on the floor. And you're like, shit, that is unbelievable. Unbelievable, right? Amazing. I had this Pac-Man machine, and you could put it into demo mode. And my brother and I used to have one of those penny saver routes, so it's like 650 of those stupid things you'd have to hang on doorknobs. And so you have to assemble them all. And we would just have it on demo mode and just watch this little thing play. And we're like, and of course the batteries would be dead by the time we had a chance to play it. So it wasn't too smart. But this is what we were growing up with. And it was the world trying to figure out what technology meant. And so we had all of this experimentation that was going on at the time. But as I said, why did we care? Because worlds beyond our own, affect and not touch. Possibilities were limitless, but lacked the vocabulary. And to that end, I want to share with you 2 awesome commercials from that era.
Only Atari makes the world's most popular home video games. The only Space Invaders. The only Asteroids. The only Pac-Man. The only Missile Command. And soon, the only Defender. And the only way you can play any of them is on a home video system made by Atari.
I challenge you, have you ever seen a family do that? Yes, all the time, of course, right? Right? But why were they doing it? Because they had no idea what it meant. Right? Grandparents playing Defender. I wish, that would have been awesome, right? But it didn't quite happen that way. I got another one to share with you that's just as lovely.
Using an Apple II is very easy. The only hard part is getting your kid away from it.
Skateboard Billy?
Are the leading computers in schools, so even though you bought it to help you work at home, your kid...
Basketball Billy? Right?
...or his own homework. Of course, if it fails, there's one last thing you can try. Get him an apple of his own.
Aww, how sweet is that? Right, again, why are kids doing this? We don't know, and it's kind of scary, but we were. And we were pushing the boundaries of what was expected with them, and we were discovering new ways to tease out of them stories that we wanted to tell, and doing all of this without a vocabulary that we could express what it is we were doing. We were creating a culture we didn't understand. I love Tron. I love it. And I love it not for what it is, but for what it tried to do. Right? So you've all seen the new one, which, of course, pales in comparison to the original. The original one is beautiful because it is so naive in the way it describes itself that it's like literally watching language form. So there's a scene in the movie where Flynn turns to Alan and he says, because somewhere in one of these memories is the evidence. And he's describing a computer file. But we couldn't say computer file or system file or document because it had no resonance with its audience. So they were trying to create language that people could understand, which is why you have characters like RAM and well, nobody knew what Tron was unless you were, a system programmer. And so they were trying to create a world and demonstrate a world that they couldn't describe themselves. It is the formation of language, the formation of culture. You're actively watching it happen. And we don't typically see that occur in society because generally forms of communication have a very long period of time in which to gestate and form and evolve. And so it happens in very small increments. But video games have emerged from the beginning with Ralph to where they are today in just over 40 years. A 40-year run of one of the most important forms of artistic and communicative expression that we have ever had as beings on this planet. And it's the truth. And some people go, well, you're overstating it a little bit. I don't believe I am. I just don't think we've had enough time yet to fully understand that. And we're going to talk a bit about that. We were creating a culture we didn't understand, and it was beautiful, and it meant a tremendous amount to those of us that grew up doing this. And the flip side of that was everyone was scared to death of what could be, right? It's going to ensnare your kids, and they're all going to become dumb, or they're all going to become, violent, and all these sorts of things, right? And we still deal with some of that today, but less and less over time. And there's a reason why. Because in 2013, we have gamers raising gamers. Right? So for the first time in the history of the games industry, as well as technology, we have the adults that grew up playing video games and never stopped raising children of their own. I have 3 kids. My oldest is almost 16. She just started driving, which is great. So she's doing very well. When she watches this, great job. My middle daughter is 11 and my son is 7, and we play video games almost every single day in our house. Right? Not necessarily together all the time, but we try to. Right? My oldest, obviously different tastes than my youngest, but we all play in this interactive space because there's meaning in the interaction. And there's meaning that my parents wouldn't understand, but my children, I understand why my kids want to play it because it's the reason I want to play too. And so this is what's happening as these gamers, the first gamers, are getting older. We're not stopping playing. We are willing to appropriate these platforms into our lives and play these games and devote time to doing so because gameplay is important. Technology, the barrier to technology has been almost eliminated in society through democratization of technology, through the reduction in price, through democratization of information access. Consider the fact that for the first time in human history, an individual can broadcast a message to the planet unimpeded. Right? When movable type was created, it's like, are you nuts? We're going to create books and educate the serfs? Are you mad? Right? They're going to overthrow, the ruling class. Why would we ever do this? Right? And we saw this as new forms of communication emerge in society. There's always this pushback because we don't know what it's going to be. Today, we have this global reach and it's transforming the face of the planet. Eric and I were talking over dinner tonight. Realize that for most of the world, as they understand the internet, forget about ARPANET and DARPANET and all these things that took root in the 1950s forward. You've been living with the internet as you know it for 18 years? That's it. in 18 years, it's fundamentally changed the way we operate as a planet, as a society, discovering culture, economics. Everything has been fundamentally changed. You can't shut it off. We cannot remove it from society, right? It's that important a platform. And so as we are comfortable with technology, we start to anthropomorphize it. We start to find the humanity within it and adopt it, bring it in. And video games are incredibly adept at doing that, at breaking down the barriers of fear, because everyone wants to play, everyone wants to have fun, right? It's something that we do as human beings. We seek out comfort, we seek out enjoyment, and video games are literally the conduit into that. And all technology fear melts away because I got to get access to the game, right? Does anyone still play Farmville? This is my wife's farm. She plays every day. She's played for more than 3 years, and it's a morning ritual. So we get up, we get the kids up, we go down and make coffee, and while they're having breakfast, she'll go and sit down and check email, and then she goes up, click, 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 and then she's like, okay, I'm done for the day. Although she did say when we were out to lunch the other day, she's like, oh, I have to get home and farm this stuff because it's going to die. So I told her, I said, when we were building this thing for the exhibition, we were talking about the inclusion of social games and whether or not they should be included in this. And we didn't include them for a variety of reasons. And I told her, I said, Farmville isn't a game. Okay, I played it, and if you go to my farm, you will see a Galaga ship made out of bales of hay, you will see a puka and a Figar, and that's it. Because I'm like, look, I made some classic arcade characters with bales of hay, and that's about all the attention I can give to this. And so she overheard me talking to a colleague about this, and she goes, Farmville is a game. I'm like, how is it a game? To what end? And she said, to whatever end I deem it to be a game. I'm like, all right, explain yourself. See if you can, and for the first time in the 23 years I've known you, let's see if you can shift my thought on this. And she said, I only plant things that bloom beautifully, regardless of the point value. I plant them in patterns that I enjoy creating, and when they finally bloom, it makes me happy to see them bloom. And I said, yeah, but to what end? She goes, to the end that it makes me happy. And I said, you're exactly right. That is a game for you. You have teased the metagame out of this framework for you. And she changed my mind. And sometimes we forget when we approach games from an academic perspective, or we approach them purely from an artistic perspective, sometimes we forget that it's a noble thing, it's a good thing to do nothing more than just elicit a smile in a person. That's a very good thing in a world that is increasingly complex, that is facing broader and broader challenges. Just making people happy is not a bad result from some of these things. And so sometimes we can look too deep, right? We have to look at the humanity that gets teased out of the games. And so she's right. For her, Farmville is a game. For me, it never will be. But that's just a matter of taste, right? And her tastes are better than mine, so just to get that on record. And so, how many people have ever played this game? Phantasy Star Online. A couple of you? A little bit. Okay, so Phantasy Star Online was a game that came out during the Dreamcast era. The Dreamcast was the very first video game machine that actually shipped with a modem in it. So it was the very first out-of-the-box online connected experience. The cool thing about this game, it was a massively multiplayer game, but it was really instanced. So you had all these very small arenas in which you played. And what they did is they created a translation system for, I think it was 5 languages at the time, the five most used dialects within the regions that this game launched. And so what it could do is instant translation. So you'd create a sentence in broken English, and it would change it into broken Japanese or broken German or broken Italian. And what they found, so they created this system to provide ease of communication, instant translation. This is back in the 2000 era. They also created an icon system. And the icon system were smiley faces and fingers pointing and arrows of escalation. And what they found is that in playing in the global games, almost nobody used natural language. They all used icons to speak. out of this system emerged an entire new language that the community could understand, right? 2 shouty faces and 3 hands that way that are red means there's something about to bite your head off, like don't go that way. And so you learned this entire language, and there was no group that set out to do it. It just emerged, right? It was born out of the space. And it was the first time that we actually saw within a gameplay framework in a global space that a new language emerged out of a system that the designer had not intended. So it's important to remember that as we're building games, people are going to do things with them that you have no intention of ever occurring, but it will appear, right? So it's important to listen. And again, it was, as I said before, the formation of language, the formation of culture that was happening. So why? Because we need to play. As human beings, we need to play. And we game everything that we do, whether or not we believe we do. We have, whether it's fitness, and we have this mental block of competing against ourselves, or competing against a spouse, or competing against our friends for better health. It's how we learn. It's thrill of competition. It's community and teams. It's, the formation of tribes and society and these sorts of things. It's important because we're able to self-identify with large groups, and we like to do that. We like to be part of the team, and I always find it funny when people are like, "Yay, we won!" It's like, you didn't play. And it's like, no, yeah, but the team I'm cheering for did. I want to be part of that. But computers changed our course. This is something that we've done forever, right? Since recorded history has depicted, we've played games. That's what we do. But computers changed our course, and they did something that was really unexpected and changed the way we thought about games. For the very first time, computers acted as a surrogate for human interaction. They became a replacement. And so we were asked to play alone. And it was this very brief moment in time, evolutionarily speaking, that we played by ourselves. Is it any wonder with the lowering the cost of entry into the internet for communication, is it any wonder people are playing online? It's what we want to do. We want to play with other people. We want to engage with them, not just the computer. And that's why, in going through the museum project and talking to a bunch of game designers, almost universally they would say the greatest new technology, or the greatest thing that's going to move game design forward is the internet, is connection. And they're all viewing it this way. And video games are part of our culture, right? They suddenly have become part of the culture. Well, not really suddenly. It's gradually then suddenly, right? It's been this kind of 40-year creep, then all of a sudden everybody seems to be doing this, right? So does anyone know who that guy is up here? This cat? No? Seth Sternberger from 8-Bit Weapons. Anyone listen to chiptune music? Oh, just a handful of us? Okay, it's a small party, but that's okay. Seth and his wife have a band called 8-Bit Weapon. They only play, their instruments are Commodore 64s, and they have keyboards they've modified for them. They play sets all over the world, and it's all music they generate purely out of the Commodore 64. And sequencing actually on an Apple II, which is great. You have Penny Arcade, and you have shirts, and you have books about video game and game culture that make it to the New York Times bestseller list, like Ready Player One. Everyone's read that book, right? Please, has anyone not read it? Raise your hand. Okay, you haven't read it?
No, I have not read it.
Okay, I'm going to give you one spoiler in this, okay? And I'm going to give it to you because I have to. No earmuffs. So Ernie Klein wrote, I believe he was the guy behind Fanboys, which was the movie about Star Wars fan guys, right? And this book is every wonderful thing about the 1980s rolled into this incredible story about finding this treasure. Apparently the richest man in the universe or in the world was the lead singer from Oingo Boingo, and when he died, he left clues about where this treasure was buried in this virtual world. So he's battling, the main character is battling through this one area, and he finally gets to the lair of the Lich King, and he's like, you're going to have to battle me to win this key. And he's like, great, ready to battle. Awesome. And he goes, excellent. So sword something? He goes, no, we're going to joust. And he's like, I don't see any horses or anything. And then a joust arcade machine appears. And so in the story, he's in this cave battling the Lich King on joust. So he's like that, right? And it's just, and it's one of those moments you just go, oh my goodness, don't have that moment at like 1 a.m. when you're reading in bed and everyone else is asleep. It's like, oh my God. Sorry, go back to sleep, right? But the point of that is that the things about video games, the storytelling capacity of them, are generally accepted by the public, right? I love this video clip. This is a rapper named MC Frontalot, and MC Frontalot is a nerdcore rapper. You know the term? So G4 TV, which is no longer on the air, they had done a series of commercials several years ago called It's a Nerd's World. And so this was MC Frontalot's commercial clip.
Wrong end of the joystick stuck up in the handhold. You're in line for a pitfall, kid, you get on. In terms of your two-player mastery, 6 months per scan line, not hide and seek. And I'm the pride of geeks who are shameless and brazen in this snobbery over whose console is most ancient and most Asian. Bootleg or legit, emulated rear projection on the side of a blimp. Elevated, point up, point out the pixels, but don't miss your button finger with or snap out this old rapper will top your score with his best. Frontalot already did a Polaroid test. It's a nerd's world.
This guy sells at like 5,000-seat venues now. The guy headlines at PAX, which is 85,000 people that go, right? So all of a sudden, this whole kind of nerd culture is coming into the mainstream. Ew, right? Who likes it? Raise your hands. Who hates it? Great. It's fantastic. Love that people hate it. And most of the people that I talk to that hate it go, oh, it's every horrible stereotype about us as gamers, about us as, people who have grown up in nerd culture. What's really interesting about the show and why I love it is because even though, yes, there are massive caricatures of the archetypes that sit within the nerd culture, the science is correct. Right? They have 2 theoretical physicists on the writing staff that actually fact-checked everything. So when they're talking about a theory, they're talking about the work they're doing. When you see the equations on the boards, they are all scientifically accurate, 100%. When they talk, really, people in your life that had no idea what Schrodinger's cat was until it appeared on Big Bang Theory, right? But now, of course, yes, Schrodinger did this massive experiment and blah, 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 blah. You've seen the Schrodinger's dog T-shirt? It's just him standing there and the box is just going bark, 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 right? Because dog's in the box. But I love it, again, not for everything that it does, but for what it's trying to do. It is the appropriation of this subculture into modern culture. And so a lot of the people that say, well, I hate it, it's because it's this intrusion. We've been part of this club. I self-identify with each other. We can view ourselves as gamers, and I know who you are because I'm you and you're me. And the answer is, you're not, because everybody is, right? Whether or not people have played today or don't, most people, right, in their middle-aged people today, remember a point in time when computers and technology, video games were important to them, right? There's a grounding there, and it's only going to continue to be, a more prominent part of global culture. By example, how many have heard of the band I Fight Dragons? Oh, good. There's a couple of you in there. Great. So I'm going to play you this one. We won't go through the whole video. I'm going to play you a clip here. This is a band based out of Chicago. They just got done touring on the Warped Tour this summer, which is a very popular tour. And the funny thing about it was, I love the band. And I discovered them actually through Nintendo Video. So I'm like, oh my God, that's great. So having an older teenage daughter, she's like, I want to go to the Warped Tour this summer. Great, I Fight Dragons is going to be on it. Me and your mom will go. She's like, oh, that's such a bad idea. So it's like, okay, we're going to go. And there's All Time Low and a bunch of bands said, yeah, we like the band said, they're great, we'll go. So finally she goes, yeah, I'm actually going to take this trip with my friends and their mom to California and everything. I'm like, okay, so we're not going to go because we're not going to be the oldest people there. And so I got on their fan page and I emailed the lead singer of the band, Brian. I was like, hey, we did this thing at the Smithsonian. You guys are coming through Maryland, and if you want to see it, let me know if by any chance you have time. And he emails like 10 minutes later going, we'd love to. That's so awesome. Let's set it up. I was like, oh my God, that's crazy, right? So I have a very funny story about that later to show you. But again, for a talented band that if you removed the piece of it that they love, which is the game component, they would sound like a really good, modern pop band. Okay, so I'm going to let this play for a minute. Brian actually gave me access to the video before it was released, and I didn't know it was a private link, so I go on Twitter, and I'm like, everyone check this out! And they're like, no, pull it down! I was like, I'm so sorry. Reading is read.
Guys, check out what I found in the basement.
Check this out. Hipsternomicon. Never heard of it.
Look it up.
All right.
Tater Matt. Same and daring, son. Dar his hiker dance die hard, son.
Come on, guys, turn it off.
So they actually play a Super Nintendo controller as an instrument, and that's what you're hearing injected into the song are sequenced sounds from video games. And Packy, who you'll see over here, he has a guitar made out of an NES, and it's a real guitar, and the Nintendo still works. So you can put it down and plug it in and play a video game on his guitar. Power pad. There it is.
The crazies are coming to life.
That is the most awesome use of a power glove ever in a piece of video, by the way. So again, it is these guys are appropriating parts of that culture into something that is more mainstream, and the more that occurs, the wider the net is going to be cast. Again, it's not about gamers; it's everybody who games, which is everybody. Okay, but it's not just games. You know, we talk about educational games and why people play these things to work the brain. How many people love Professor Layton? Has anyone played it? Handful of you? Are most of you just not raising your hand? Come on. Okay, some of you have played it. This is basically, it's a math game. They're teaching logic and everything through a murder mystery, right? Spatial recognition and assembly of 3D space and segmentation. They're teaching all these math concepts through a game, and people don't realize they're actually learning mathematics while playing the game. Logic puzzles and these sorts of things. So some of you have seen, I'm going to move it along here too. So how about Peacemaker? Have you seen Peacemaker? All right. Peacemaker's about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a top-level RTS, and all of the news that comes into the game is actual news from the Associated Press, and it affects the game in real time. And this has won several awards for its work as a serious game that talks about a social issue. It also happens to be a Java game, so we love it for that. And then Persuasive Games, Ian Bogus' company, who did Cow Clicker and all these things. Has anyone ever seen these games? Right? I know you have. But it's things like Fat World, which is all about the fast food industry in low-income areas and how it exploits people in lower-income areas and how they build their enterprises. Things like Disaffected, which is why would a $7 an hour Kinko's kid give a crap about how good your document is at 3:30 in the morning? Right? Because they're disaffected workers, and how do you create systems to better engage, to have people take pride in their work and these sorts of things. So, there are groups out there that are building these things to tell stories about our society and reflect what's going on there, but do it in a way that makes it easy to get in, because it looks like a game, but you're actually learning something behind it. Video Games Live, for those of you that haven't seen it, Video Games Live is this. It is a 2.5-hour concert that is done all over the world. They toured in 96 places last year. This is the National Symphony Orchestra playing with Tommy. It's 2.5 hours of video game music that's all choreographed and synchronized to the footage that's on the screens. And this was a special that PBS did on this, and I guarantee you're going to see a musician in the National Symphony Orchestra do something with this instrument that you've never seen happen before.
How would you describe Video Games Live as
I'll just let it play for a
Power and
second.
emotion of a symphony.
Tommy, for those of you that don't know, Tommy is one of the most celebrated American video game composers. He's done more than, I think, over 280 titles, and is just really a thought leader in audio in games. Here we go. Look at this. What's amazing is you get kids sitting through 2.5 hours of orchestral music and not flinching, other than to scream or to, to jump up at the games that they love. And everyone knows the video game pianist, the Mario pianist, right? And he does it blindfolded when he comes out on stage first, and they got this whole thing that goes along with it. So, we're finding all of the ways that culture is appropriating video games. And the big question that I had, and was helping the Smithsonian American Art Museum to ask, as well as not resolve, but present a case for, is, are video games art? Can they be art? And not just the art within video games. We've seen many exhibitions do that. We wanted to explore video games as an art form themselves, right? Because I believe that video games, by their nature, because they require what we consider to be traditional art across all these different vectors, together they become greater than their individual parts. So Georgina Goodlander is an exhibition coordinator at the museum. This is the person that I worked with. She started programming or playing on a Amiga 500. She paints monsters. She's a fine artist and went to school for it, and she only paints monsters now, which is awesome. She launched the very first museum-based alternate reality game called Ghosts of a Chance. And mustaches. She also paints mustaches. I should make sure I do that as well. There she is with one of these Warhammers. And she started playing Minecraft, which was pretty awesome. So Georgina and I were tasked with putting this together. Georgina having to coordinate all of the stuff that I was going to throw at her, and then me trying to assemble this exhibition. So the concept behind this, how many people went to see it? Did anybody go down to DC to see it? All right, so we have at least 3. Good. Did you like it? Yes. All right, good. All right, we'll see. Let's see if you really liked it. We're going to talk about it now. So here's the concept, which was to present the evolution of art form across generations of technology, right? The echoes of design is what I had been referring to as, because when we look at things like Pitfall, for example, and you look at Nathan Drake running through a jungle environment, you realize that the cadence in which both of those principal characters move are identical. The type of obstacles they have to overcome, the way they clamber over things, there is a language to the cadence in which they move, this mechanical language that was started back in the 1970s and still persists to this day. And so what we did is we set up the exhibition so people can actually see the evolution of the form over time, but hear those echoes of design, right, and see how they've persisted over time. We heard directly from some of the most influential designers in video game design, and we wanted to elevate the opportunity that video games represent as an artistic medium. And it's something that the Smithsonian was able to do through their brand and their weight within this kind of a community. This idea of the 3-voice premise is quite simply, it's the foundation for the exhibition, which is in video games you have 3 distinct voices. You have the voice of the author and the storyteller. It's somebody who has something they want to say. When you play a Hideo Kojima game, if you play through the games, you understand that it's really not a game about war, it's a game about the failure of diplomacy, right? He has a very particular worldview on war. Given that his parents grew up surviving, the bomb in Hiroshima, and his worldview and the way he views this kind of conflict is directly as a result of that. And that persists in his games to this day. If you take a cursory glance at it, you go, it's just a war game. And it's, this solid snake guy running around killing people. No, that's not exactly what it is. So we have the voice of the author. The second voice is the mechanical voice of a game. And the game actually talks to you. It tells you, this is how you are to approach me. This is the possibility space. These are the walls. These are the mechanics. This is how you speak to me. And then the third voice is that of the player. And this is where video games transcend other forms of art. Because what video games allow you to do as a player is you can make these small choices throughout the game in terms of the way you engage it that personalize the experience. But all of the authority of the author is retained. Doesn't matter how many times, how many different ways you try to play through a Metal Gear game, Kojima has you start at a place and he has you end at a place. And every major plot point that he wants to tell you is told, regardless of what you do. And there is no other form of art that allows you to do that. You can't do it with movies, it's linear. You can't do it with books, they're linear, unless it's choose your own adventure. And even there, that's just linear, but just across these other threads, right? You still end where they want you to. So this three-voice premise informed everything that we did within the exhibition. And, it originally started with this very famous, when you take a look back in the games industry and the original thought for this approach to video games. Does anyone know where this comes from? Can a computer make you cry? No. From Electronic Arts. In 1982. This was the founding of the company, and the reason they're called Electronic Arts is they viewed themselves as digital artists. They did not view themselves as computer programmers. They didn't view themselves as game designers. Their whole premise was, can a computer make you cry? Can it elicit a smile? Can it surprise you in a very human way? And they were trying to ask this question in 1982. Have you played Missile Command? Handful of you? Okay. Well, then let me explain real quickly. It's an awesome game, so please, if you have the chance to, well, now you're going to have to play it. Eric, you need to make this some sort of assignment for this class here. So this is Missile Command. In the game, you have 6 cities across the bottom of the screen, and missiles come in from the top, and you have to blow the missiles out of the sky, and you have a certain amount of missiles in each one of the silos. You have to destroy those missiles before they destroy the cities. Simple, right? Blow them out of the sky, and you're done. And then it goes up to the next level, and it gets faster, and it gets faster, and faster, and faster, until the game just ends, right? Simple, it's a target game, right? This is what the designer has to say about it.
Well, Missile Command, to me, was a lot of fun, but it was also a serious matter. And when Atari asked me to do the game, one of the things I said was, this is going to be a totally defensive game, it's not going to be an offensive game. I refused to do something where I had sent off missiles to attack the USSR. So he said, fine. So it's a totally defensive game. And to me, then it's moral. You're defending your country against attack. But the thought of what actually happens when there's a nuclear attack is terrifying. And working on the game for 6 months, I internalized a lot of the stuff. So I'd have nightmares about nuclear attacks. In my dream, I'd see a white streak going across the sky, just like in Missile Command. And I'd be up hiking in the mountains, and I'd see it hit in the valley, and I can say it now. And I'd see the explosion, and I'd know that the blast was going to hit me in like 15 seconds. And I'd wake up in a cold sweat. And this happened quite frequently when I was doing the game, and then it tapered off after the game. But still, I had them for a couple of years afterwards, maybe one every 2-3 months. So it was a sobering experience.
From that, would you ever have imagined that was the message behind that? But the problem was the systems of the day when David was creating that game they were not competent enough to fully articulate what he was thinking. Today we don't have that problem. And in my opinion, if you have somebody who has a moral stance, who is observing the world, who's reflecting it through the art he creates, and he's suffering for it, how is that any different from any other artist ever? Right? People go, well, it was done for a commercial endeavor. So was Norman Rockwell's work. Right? Without the Saturday Evening Post, you would not have this American institution of the Rockwell paintings. And just because it required it used a commercial route to disseminate that word, doesn't detract in any way from the artistic merit of the work. And it's important to make sure that we never conflate the two, that we never just say it's just purely done to make money. Yes, some of it is done to make money, just as most artwork is done to make money too, right? People like to eat, so, that's just one of those things. So that's enough about that. Let me tell you quickly about the exhibition and what we did. So we had 240 games that I collected that would fit a narrative that I wanted to tell, but we could only display 80 of the games. And the reason we collected 240 was, again, in keeping with that three-voice premise, I wanted to ensure that people who loved playing games as much as I did had some voice, had some say in what they would be coming in to see. Did anybody vote in this? No? A couple of you? Okay. We had 1.7 million votes from 175 countries in less than a month. It crashed their servers within 10 minutes of launching, and they had never expected anything, nor had the museum had ever seen a response like this, ever. It was pretty amazing. It was pretty sobering. And then Georgina and I had this really awesomely corny blue screen set with my Flynn Lives shirt and her mustache shirt going through the 80 picks. What's interesting about the selection process as well is not everything that I wanted in the exhibition made it in. So there were some games like, or genres like Adventure for Super Nintendo, and the three choices were Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, Chrono Trigger, and Earthbound. And I got emails of people going, "You're an asshole for putting that in there because how can I vote for one? All three need to be there. You suck." Rah, 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 rah. I mean, one guy went so far as to say, you should be shot in the face for that. And I'm like, okay. You clearly have some issue, right? So, but what it meant was, there was just this passion, this passionate outpouring from a community that says, this means so much to me, how can you not include it? Yeah, well, I voted for Link to the Past, or Chrono Trigger, and Link to the Past made it in. So even as the guest curator, I didn't get a chance to have everything in there that I wanted. And that wasn't the point. The point was that collectively, for those of us that love this medium, our collective voice is heard. So this is what we did. As I was explaining to Eric at Game Developer Conference 2011, it was my, I think, 12th or 13th year at GDC. I had spent only about 15 minutes on the show floor because we interviewed 24 industry titans in 27 hours. And so that's my room in the hotel. That's Nolan Bushnell, the man who founded Atari. He showed up to the set with a gin martini, which was just awesome. And we had just stacked all the furniture on one side. And the thing is, you can't shoot video like that with air conditioning going. But we had to have all those lights on, so we would have to chill the room as much as we could and then shut it off. So by the end of every set, everyone's just pouring down sweat, and then we'd have to cool the room off and try to do it again. That's Robin Hunicke, who did Journey for that game company. This is great. This is Warren Spector and Ron Gilbert. And what was so awesome about this is, Eric knows, he's been around the industry long enough that these are friends that we see and, we get to have conversations with, mostly at industry events and these sorts of things. However, every once in a while, you find people that should know each other that don't. So I'm walking Warren Spector out of the room, and Georgina's walking Ron in. And as I'm taking Warren out, he goes, "Is that Ron Gilbert?" And I'm like, "Yes." He goes, "Can you introduce me to him?" I'm like, "What? Okay." And at the same time, Ron Gilbert says to Georgina, "Is that Warren Spector? Can you introduce me to him?" So the pictures we have of the two of them, they're almost like, it was like that, hug each other. So it was just wonderful because you had this meeting of these incredible creative forces that in some cases had never even met. And this is my friend Mike Micah. This is in his basement. And this is part of it. He has over 6,000 games in his house. And this is where we pulled some of the ephemera. The problem I have in going in there is I just lose my mind, and I'm of zero help. So I finally told the museum folks that came, I'm like, just go talk to Mike, because I'll be over here combing through stuff. And so we wound up pulling some of the materials for the exhibition out of there. This is the layout of the exhibition. And what we did is it was a 6,000 square foot installation. It was the second largest space in the museum. The first space that was used, the largest space, was the Norman Rockwell exhibition. That was the Norman Rockwell paintings of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. So we only got the second largest. I'll take it behind that. So you came down this hall, and we had this massive display here. And in the front first area, it was mostly ephemera. So it was sketches and maquettes and these sorts of things, and hearing from artists about what inspires them and those sorts of things. Moving into the second room, we had these 5 huge screens in which you were able to play one of 5 different games. They were Pac-Man, Super Mario Brothers, The Secret of Monkey Island, Myst, and Flower. And those 5 games were selected by me, and they were not put up to a vote. And the reason I selected those games is they all did something different within their respective era that not only changed the way the public thought about video games, but it changed the way designers thought about them. right? Pac-Man, amazingly enough, when the game shows up first in the arcades in the early 1980s, what is it sitting against? Missile Command and Space Invaders and Sub Hunt and all of these war tactical games. So all of a sudden, here comes in this candy-coated game, and all of a sudden, women start showing up. People are like, what? It's ridiculous. And kids, what? Oh my God, right? So it changed the way the public thought about it. And if you think about what happened during that time, the rest of society kind of figured it out too and went, oh my God, maybe we'll create cereals and board games and cartoons and a hit music, a hit song and clothing. It was society and culture trying to figure out what it meant. And so we had those 5 games. And then we had this gallery here that followed 20 systems across 40 years, displaying 80 games that showed the evolution of the form over that time. I captured all the footage, so it's me playing all the games except for 2. 2 and a couple that my co-author Pat captured me because I didn't have a PC rig set up to do Minecraft and a couple other ones. But there were 2 games I was not allowed to use my footage for. One was Sonic Adventure, and the other one was Metal Gear. And I was told by both companies that the person playing them doesn't know how to play the game properly or well, so they would provide footage for the same areas that I was trying to capture. I'm like, if Hideo Kojima wants to say I don't play his game well, I'm fine with that. That's perfectly fine. It was about a half a terabyte of footage, again, 80 frames, and I had to write all the materials for it. And this was the construction phase of this. So the Smithsonian had actually built these incredibly beautiful kiosks that kind of looked like elongated arcade machines, and this is what the final one looks like. About 2/3 of the systems that were in the exhibition are out of my personal collection, so they'll be traveling for the next 3 years. So there's a little separation anxiety there. I already told my wife I'm going to pick up a Saturn on eBay because I just have to have one at home. And they built these components that were interactive. So what you were able to do was, well, interactive in the sense that you could trigger a video. What you would see is 60 to 90 seconds of annotated footage that described an artistic point or a mechanic or something that set the game genre forward, because we couldn't have 80 games with everyone playing them in the exhibition. And we had David Gleason and Michael Mansfield, who are incredible designers and designers and experiential designers at the museum, helped to create these things. We wanted to go ahead and make sure that we used original hardware for all the games people played, and here's the best. Everyone's played Myst, right? Or at least seen it? Great. Rand Miller is there for the opening of the exhibition. Awesome guy, right? Rand and Robin created the game. The game kept crashing because we were running it on, I think it was Windows 95, the build that they had, we were running it on the original disk, and we kept crashing it. And we're like, crap, this thing opens in like a day and a half. So we're like, Rand, do you know anyone we can call? And he goes, oh, I know exactly what the problem is. So Rand Miller comes up and he troubleshoots the display on the show floor. He just pulls up Windows and he starts going through and changing stuff. He goes, oh yeah, we ran into this problem all the time we were developing the game. So let me go ahead and take care of it. So we had Rand Miller actually fix his game on the floor before the exhibition opened. And he said to me, he goes, here's Myst on an iPhone. So it's this high definition game about the surreal world in front of the low definition game of the surreal world in the Smithsonian. He's like, how surreal is that? That's like recursive surrealism. I'm like, I know. Totally crazy, right? Here's more of the construction. And they just did a really wonderful job. It's maze-like patterns on the floor and all this setup here. They did this ridiculous opening event, completely surprised. We knew we were going to have this opening party and people were going to be able to come and there'd be some press discussion and everything. I had no idea that they were going to do this in the way that they did. It was absolutely stunning. And I'm like, this is the closest DC is ever going to get to an E3-like show. I mean, this was incredible. And when I was giving opening remarks for this, that wall is basically like, I don't know, that's got to be 60 feet tall. And it's Geometry Wars, so it's just playing overhead while we're doing the opening there. Pac-Man showed up. Georgina, she was completely enamored. She was here with, Ken and Hideo Kojima, so it was a pretty wonderful day. During the opening of the exhibition, that opening weekend, we had 23,000 people show up. The line stretched around the block outside. The line inside of the museum here stretched 2.5 city blocks. inside the museum on the top floor, and the problem was the line almost wrapped around to the exit of the exhibition. Museum's like, we've never had to deal with this problem before. Right? What was really wonderful about it, though, was all of a sudden you had people waiting for 2.5 hours to get in, and they're observing other artwork and going, I had no idea this was in here. And then you'd also see tweets like, are you kidding me? This is what they consider art, and it took this long for video games to get in here, you know? Right? So you had that flip side of it. It was an introduction of that culture to an audience that might not have otherwise, you know, come in to see this. This is Seth and Michelle from 8-Bit Weapon playing Commodore 64 music in the courtyard of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. We're doing some book signing, and I'm doing Tree Pose with Nolan Bushnell because the projector wasn't working, so we had to kill some time. So we were just kind of hanging out up there. These are some of the panels that we held. One was on the future of games, another was on the past. You know, folks up there, again, Ken Levine, Kelly Santiago, Paul Barnett from EA, Mark Delora from Game Developer Conference and Game Developer Magazine and THQ and all this stuff. Nolan gave this incredible talk about the formation of Atari and what they were thinking when they were creating these things. And then I did this 90-minute sit-down interview with Hideo Kojima, which was awesome. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, conversation, you know, everything is right there. Like, this is what you say to Mr. Kojima. These are the questions you've asked, and so they're there. and it was great. He was incredibly gracious and very forthcoming. In fact, he had said at one point earlier in an interview, he said, I don't believe video games are art. I view myself as a curator, and within that digital museum, I'm placing art, but I don't necessarily consider video games art. And so I asked him on stage, I said, after viewing this and seeing how it's laid out, he said, I don't really remember what I said, so let me readdress that. And he said, I believe that, yes, we can recognize them as art. And so it was pretty awesome. Actually, I'll tell you one last thing about that. So who's the rock photographer? Annie Leibovitz. Everyone's seen Annie Leibovitz's work? She had an exhibition at the museum, and the museum sold out. They had sold out that auditorium in like 26 minutes for her talk. Kojima sold out in 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And people were like, there's something wrong with your website, I can't get a ticket. They're like, they're gone. Like, you just opened the site. And then, of course, the museum's like, who is Hideo Kojima? Like, how is that even possible? Right? And it was wonderful. But again, you know, to the museum's credit, they were exploring a section of art and a culture they had never examined before. They were incredibly forward-thinking. They were very gracious. They were very patient. I could not have imagined a better group to work with. They were absolutely amazing. And what came out of it, this, you know, when we talked about building, you know, anytime you do an exhibition, you have to have a pamphlet that goes with it. So I said, let's not do that. Let's write a proper book that allows us to talk in depth about the work in the exhibition. Let's have the full interviews with all of these people that we interviewed. And so I got a chance to work with this incredible publisher up here, Welcome Books, and they had a lot of faith in the project, and I got to work on it with one of my closest friends, which is, if you ever have a chance in life to do something really awesome with a close friend, it's quite rewarding. And so this is really kind of the further depth around all of the 80 games and the interviews that we did. I told you there was one more I Fight Dragons thing. So they came to the museum, which was awesome. And we actually got to keep the museum open for like another 45 minutes after it closed because they were coming in off tour. And my son, who was only 7, the kids all made posters, and he has like a dragon t-shirt on, and they were all walking around, and my son goes, Dad, I thought you said we were going to go see them play. I'm like, no, Tom, they're coming here to see this show. And he's like, I thought you said we were going to see them play. And Brian goes, what did Tom say? And I said, oh, he thought we were going to see you guys perform. And he goes, oh, we'll perform for him. So these guys had just driven down from Connecticut on their tour van or whatever it is, completely dead tired, no warm-up or anything. So they come in, and this is one of the 2 things that they sang. That's the Legend of Zelda theme, for those of you that don't know. Go buy their stuff. They are awesome. They are awesome guys and incredibly, incredibly talented.
That's funny when you hear it in voice. It has almost like a Middle Eastern flavor.
Yeah.
It doesn't come out in the pure.
But it does come out in some of the artwork. It does come out in some of the treatments of the space, right? Okay, so I'm going to share a couple of things with you, and then we'll have a quick discussion. We'll open up some question and answers for you. I wanted to show you some of the signatures that people made in the guest books. Okay. Great exhibit. Find me on PlayStation Network. And there's a link, of course. Best place I have ever seen in the whole wide world. I know, right? Look at that. By Logan. No, but I said, you know what? That we have to go ahead and make a level out of this. Like, we have to get an engine and just do something with that. It's awesome. Leroy Jenkins made an appearance. Flower is one of the greatest games of all time. If there were some headphones on the display, the full effect would happen. We'd be able to fully appreciate the amazing score and not have to hear the Mario Brothers theme. That said, I get teary-eyed watching people play it, let alone when I play it. Cool stuff. Nick from Lexington. Oh, my flipping turtles, this is awesome. By Bella. This is the most awesome AWESOM place in the world. One whole page. This exhibit makes me feel at home. I feel like finally someone understands the true art. It makes me feel like I matter. I came all the way here from Texas to see it. Best exhibit Smithsonian has ever had, period. What is a man? A miserable pile of secrets? Which is awesome. And that's the best Castlevania voice I can do for you. Pac-Man rocks, apparently. A snake. What about the time sucking that happens to gamers? Effects on human interaction and normal life and lots of gaming. Thumb down dislike, lame, 2 times lame, cool story bro. Amazing job with this exhibit. Thank you, Daniel. I am Commander Shepard, and this is my favorite exhibit on the Citadel. Nice ending. I love this person. Okay, this is a very funny thing. My wife says this room reminds her too much of our house. In other words, great job. This is Ed Fries, one of the creators of Xbox and the founder of Microsoft Game Studios. And this is Ed's wife. Let me know if you need to expand the exhibit. All right, so real quickly, recap. So video games are now a permanent part of global culture. They are inextricable. They're people that even don't realize they're playing games are playing games. And I believe that we are going to find that video games, because of the fact that they're built on a set of systems, because they are about humanity, because they are capable of telling the full range today of personal emotion. And examining our society, we're going to find them to be one of the most important forms of art, one of the most important forms of communication that I believe can do everything from transform education to civics to a greater understanding of ourselves and medicine and all these things. And there are many people in the games industry working towards that end. It doesn't have to be dry and unapproachable in order for us to understand it. Did anyone ever play with the folding at home screensaver on the PlayStation 3? Do you know what folding at home is? Right, protein folding. So Stanford University, I believe it's Stanford, right? That sends in the protein bits, right? So what wound up happening was the guys when they had that working at Sony, when they launched the PlayStation 3, they said, look, we got 8 cores in this machine. Let's port a copy of the screensaver to a PS3. And what wound up happening is if you went to gaming websites and forums, people started to form teams around protein folding. And so they would have folding days. So like, okay, everybody on, Team X. Start on East Coast, 8 o'clock in the morning, turn on your PS3, let it run all day. Let's see how much of this freaking protein we can fold, right? And then we have to beat that other team. And people figured out a way to make it a game. And so they identified themselves as a team, and they would work to beat other teams in protein folding to further cancer research. And I believe, and the number, I can't cite the number, but this is the number that sticks in my head. I believe the researchers said that the PlayStation 3 and that kind of activity has accelerated their research by 20 years. It's pretty cool. Using games to figure out how to solve for cancer, not a bad thing, right? Again, we'll transform how we play, learn, discover our world, and it's not gamers versus casuals, it's everybody. We're all in, right? Whether or not you believe you're a gamer, you are. You just haven't found the game that speaks to you yet, and you will. You absolutely will. So, that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that passionate and insightful and very personal talk about your own history with, I know the dark art of getting these tables open. With games. Do you want to bring the microphone onto the table here?
Absolutely.
All right. So, Chris and I are going to chat just a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to questions. I'm sure you guys all have things that you want to say to Chris. So, let's talk a little bit about the exhibition, which I did attend. I was actually on one of the panels one of those days.
And he was great. He was great.
Thank you.
I didn't have to say that. I know him, but he was excellent.
You were excellent too.
Oh, well.
One of the criticisms that I've heard about the exhibition is that I think you had a great turn of phrase earlier in your talk. You said that at your house you have people playing video games every day, and that interaction creates meaning, and that's really at the heart of games as a cultural form. At your exhibition, only 5 games were participatory, right? And the vast majority of games were presented as information, videos, visuals, ephemera. So one of the criticisms I've heard is that if it is a cultural form or an art form that's about participation, interactivity, that the exhibition didn't showcase that aspect of games enough. How would you respond to that?
Sure. So, I don't know if you can hear me.
I think it's speaking out pretty well, right? Yeah. Okay.
As I said before, it's even people that had stopped playing games remember a time when it was important. Mm-hmm. And that memory is locked very solidly in their past. And so even though people weren't able to play in that vast amount of 80 games, we did have to be respectful of the fact we were in an art museum, right? So this cacophony of 80 games being played and people trying to fight their way through it, not to mention maintaining all of the hardware and everything for a crowd, basically 680,000 people went through the exhibition in its 6-month run, right? So we had to be respectful of the fact that there's going to be wear and tear and all these other things. However, what we observed were parents coming in with their kids and going, oh my God, I forgot how much I loved this game. Me and my friends used to sit down and blah, blah, blah. What was wonderful is you'd have these multi-generation families come in, and the parents at the beginning are like, look at this and look at that. And by the time they're getting around to the end of the exhibition, it's children teaching their parents about what they're playing today. And so they could find that connection. Again, so much of it is, it's more than just the playing of the game. It is everything around it. So I'll give you a great example of this. What is the first game you really vividly, now I'm going to question you. What's the first game you really vividly remember playing?
Video game.
Yeah, video game.
Maybe Combat Atari 2600 or maybe Night Driver in an arcade version.
Okay.
Atari Night Driver.
All right. Where was that? Where was it?
Well, Combat was in the basement of my friend Jim Wiltz's house, and
Great.
Atari Night Driver. Okay. And Atari Night Driver was in the local arcade in my mall.
So it was in your friend's house. What's his name?
Jim Wiltz.
Do you remember where you played it?
Yes.
Where?
In his basement.
What is basement? Like, do you know where it was?
Where in his
basement was?
Yeah, it was in the 70s, so it was a dark wood-paneled basement with ugly upholstery on the couch.
Did you sit on the floor?
Floor.
Was the system on the floor?
The system was on a television rack a few inches above the floor.
Okay. Do you remember the TV it was played on?
Yeah, but at this point I may be reconstructing my own memory.
Fantastic. Tell me all the same about your favorite book, your favorite album, your favorite movie.
Right.
Go.
Okay. Point.
Right. So, because what happens is, again, as I said, these things should not exist. And so we are placing them into our world. And so it's not just the playing of the game. It is everything that goes into it. It is all of the experience of interacting with people, the discovery process that you go through in playing the game. That's why video games are so different. And
Right,
it's
because
also,
games are a kind of a ritual or activity that
That's
you
right.
undertake that's a social experience. I mean, combat was a social experience.
That's
I
right.
think significantly, the Atari console, the game that came with it was not a single-player game. It was a
it required two
two-player
people.
game.
And so you're being judged through an activity. Nobody goes, you watch movies terribly. You suck at reading. Like nobody, people don't go, look at the way he turns pages. Nobody does it. So you have all of these other mechanisms that go into game playing. And so we didn't need to have everyone play every single game to understand why it was important to have those memories brought back out, to understand its place in culture for them. But the 5 games did give people a taste, right? They were allowed to go in and sample why these games were special. So we didn't feel we needed to do it for all 80.
It's interesting. You talked a lot about technology at the beginning, and I thought it was a great kind of survey of the history, your own experience with early computer technologies. Do you see a big break between games as an ancient form of human expression and endeavor, ancient board games like Senet, and you actually had, I think, a Senet piece from Egypt, Mancala games from Africa,
Right.
Go from East Asia, chess from Southeast Asia, the King's Game from Scandinavia, these ancient thousands of years old board games and sports. Do you see a continuum there with video games, or do you see that there's something fundamentally different about video games?
No, I think it is absolutely a continuum. I mean, it's another evolution, right? It's appropriating technology to continue to build on systems that we have already built, right? When you strip away the trappings of graphics and story, you're left with mechanics, right? And it's easy to see. One of the things that we did when we talk about Diablo 2 is a target game. People go, that's ridiculous. How is it a target game? Because you're never in direct control of the character. You literally are targeting things within a play space and clicking. If I replaced it with sideshow ducks and a rifle, it would be the same exact mechanic. So what we're doing with video games is we're able to layer on top of those things we've already done, greater form of expression, greater stories, different experiences, but still building on top of those mechanics. So it's just another evolutionary point in the thing that we've always done, which is play.
And I guess that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. I mean, I love the exhibition, and I think it's incredibly hard to present games in an exhibition context. And I think that for logistical reasons and other reasons, and I think that was interesting that you built these, large stages really for playing the games with like sort of carnival quality buttons and interfaces that wouldn't break down over time.
That's right.
But I wanted to ask you about this idea of games and art. Mm-hmm. So my question is, it's a really fascinating question. I think that it's been bandied around for at least a decade or more as a sort of hot topic in games and thinking about games and their relationship to culture. I wonder if in a certain sense, it was more than 100 years ago that Duchamp put a urinal in a museum, and the idea of found art, and kind of overthrew a whole romantic idea that art is about a heroic individual that's expressing their soul. And I feel like now we're in a time 100 years later when boundaries are really breaking down. Mm-hmm. That this idea of high art is not necessarily what's got the most juice in culture at large. So my question for you is, in trying to frame games as art, the art of video games, they're a form of art, they're not a form of art, are we kind of chasing after something which is already a little bit historical? This idea that that the most important thing that we should aspire to as people that love games is that they be put on the same pedestal as art. But isn't it true that the whole kind of high art, low culture, all those things are sort of in an interesting mix and flux now? Mm-hmm. You kind of see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, the reality is I can't answer that question for you because art is an entirely subjective thing. So the only way that I can frame what is art to me is through my own perspective. And quite simply, that is, I believe that if you can understand the intent of an author, the intent of an artist, but find within it a personal connection, then art has been achieved, right? Like I've stood in front of you like Jackson Pollock works, and I can appreciate the technique, and I can appreciate, him as an artist and the period in which he did this. It does absolutely nothing for me. Right. Nothing. But Flower made me physically, drop the controller. It made me tear up, and, playing games like Shadow of the Colossus really pressed against my morals. And so for me, that form of art is greater than almost anything else I've experienced. Part of it could be that I've been so immersed in it since I was a child, that it was something that I continued to pursue as I got older. But it's why in the opening statement of the exhibition, I say we're not here to say art. That's for you to decide. And by the way, I should also mention, not everybody that deems their work to be art is art. And also artists that go, my work really isn't art. That's not their choice either. Some people in the games industry are like, well, we're really not art. That's not for them to decide, right? They don't get to determine. It is society. It's the culture that determines that, right? Kind of the reluctant artist, right? So you may not think what you're creating is art, but it may very well be, and that may be out of your control, right? Again, I can't answer that whether or not, yes, everything is coming down, and so this is what bubbles up. From a popular culture, from casting the widest net, I think most people that have grown up playing this recognize there are more to games, more to video games, from an art and humanity perspective than we thought in previous time. But again, we're only 40 years young.
I think what's interesting about the question is that, you can frame games in a lot of ways as technology. You can frame games as design, as allied to architecture, graphic design.
Yep.
But I think what's interesting is that, as opposed to the design of a chair, which does have an aesthetic element, except for educational games, most games are really played for their own pleasure. Mm-hmm. And so there really are these sort of cultural animals with one foot in a lot of different realms. And by being played for their own pleasure, as you, I think, illustrated really nicely with your examples of Phantasy Star and Farmville, often it's the pleasures that people discover or create that were never even intended there.
That's part of that three-voice premise, right? That, there's a particular way the game is set forth, and it describes itself to you in a particular manner, but it's left to you to figure out where that connection is. Not all games resonate with each other, with everyone, right? There's certain games I don't like to play, so I don't play them. And just because it's entertaining, and like I said before, it's a pretty noble thing to make people happy.
But do you think
we shouldn't necessarily devalue,
Right.
It was just entertaining. That's not a bad thing.
Right, and I agree with you, and I think that it's good that you show serious games and games with a social purpose, but I agree with you, it's really important that we acknowledge that it's enough that games are beautiful, or that they cause pleasure, that they make people happy, however you want to frame it, the aesthetic experience of a game. I just have a couple more for you, then we'll go to the audience. I guess the interesting thing about where the exhibition is happening and looking at the history and games relating to other cultural forms is that, apart from the kind of the nerd issue and nerd culture, which I think is funny, and I had my own vertigo moment of this, of kind of in doing personal ads in the 90s when sort of some people would write, I thought I had the sexiest job in the world. I'm a game designer, working with computers, and then hearing people, this was paper, by the way, before online, some people writing like, no computer people, please. There was sort of like a whole, but before, like as nerds were becoming sexy. But I think there are bigger questions. Speaking generally, of course, not personally.
Of course not.
Don't you think that games have a special relevance to the times in which we live now in a way that goes just beyond, hey, technology and nerds are entering the mainstream? Do you think that there's some kind of larger synergy between games and the way the world is evolving today?
Absolutely, without question. And as you pointed out, it's not always obvious, right? It's sometimes these emerge out of the least likely of places or the least expected of places. So I'll give you a very personal example. When we had moved into a new house, and we moved far enough away that my kids were going to another school, but close enough to our old neighborhood that my oldest daughter, they were friends, and they were still friends. Toontown was a big thing. We couldn't get across town all the time to have them get together, but 3 times a week, they could sit down and play Toontown together and have this shared experience that acted as this bridge between this distance. And so, yeah, it's a kid's MMO, right? It's this instance thing. You don't necessarily know who you're going to be playing with, but they, made this play date in this virtual space that acted as a bridge between the times they could see each other. And so I think that it's important to remember, and my personal take on technology is if we cannot find the humanity in the technology we create, it's not really worth discussing. There has to be a human component to it, because if not, then we're just building to build, right? And I think games serve an incredibly important purpose in stripping away everything from gender bias and cultural bias and religious bias, because we can now present ourselves as we wish to be seen. Maybe that's even truer than the way we present ourselves in society. Now, I don't have a problem making a fool of myself every day. Like, I have no problem. Like, this is me online and off, right? But not everyone does that. And so, there's, I could tell that quick story if you like. So there was, during the interviews for the exhibition, one of the guys we were interviewing was Don Daglow. And Don is a very famous old school game designer. In fact, he created the very first RTS, or God-based game called Utopia, which was actually built out of work he was doing as a middle school teacher in the 1970s, when he walked into a cafeteria and saw 12 by 12 tiles, and then he took electrical tape and made a map of the world, and he brought his students in and had them sit in different countries and act at all these different, acts of diplomacy and war and trade and everything. And so Don was talking about...
Shades of Buckminster Fuller's World Game.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So he was talking about Dungeons & Dragons that he created for AOL, which is one of the very first kind of MMO type of games that made their way in. And he had gotten a letter from this woman who said, "Your game saved my life." And he's like, okay, well, what does that mean, right? And she said, I was in an abusive marriage, and my husband was becoming increasingly jealous and more violent, to the point where she was allowed to go to work, and then she was locked in their master bedroom when she would come home. But he let her play in the computer and didn't realize that she was playing an online game, which was a Dungeons & Dragons game. 3 months into the game, she felt comfortable enough, she felt a human enough connection to these players that she told them her real-world situation. And these people got her out. They got her to a safe place. They were able to extract this man. And she said, "Your game saved my life. Your game gave me the tools and the people to save my life."
Right, and there was that particular mix of anonymity,
right,
but also intimacy at the same time because of the shared activity.
Because she could be intimate in a way with that anonymity that she could not in the real world. She could not tell her friends what was going on for fear of her husband. But in this game, because there was none of that fear, there was no retribution that he could possibly, bring on her. She was able to find the tools and the people to help her get out, and saved her life.
It's a really powerful story. Mm-hmm. Okay, so given this incredible complexity and subtlety of games as a form of culture, design, technology, art, final question. We're here at NYU at a university. We're educating people about games, game design. Our program has courses in game design, game production, game scholarship. Should we even be doing that? Most of the people that you mentioned, and the two of us, we didn't study games. Should we be, and how should we be educating game creators of the future and game scholars and critics?
Sure, I think it's incredibly important. I think anytime we can apply educational rigor to this, so we better understand, we can continue to build on top of that.
You talked about the lack of vocabulary, for example.
It creates that vocabulary. It creates this understanding of how to build. When you talked before about technology and games, video games are literally the collision of science and art. That's what they are, right? They're technology and art. Technology alone doesn't do anything. It's what we do with it that matters, right? So video games really provide that purpose to it. And programs that you have at NYU and other universities around the country that are starting to bring these programs up are important, because they're helping to build that vernacular, build that language of creation and design that we can then continue to build on. It's no longer done just in the garages, right? We share it in a community space, we share it in an educational space, we can share it in a world forum. And it's only going to continue to move faster. Again, we were just scratching the surface with what we could do with games for healthcare, games for the elderly, games for the disaffected, games for, solving very large-scale problems. Now, I sat in as a judge on a game that was done for supply chain management. I mean, and by the end of the day, I mean, it was a full-on, brawl of, you guys suck, and I mean, like, they completely got into the mechanics of the game, and from it, they learned about this massive global supply chain system and how fragile it can be. It's impossible to teach all of that in one day unless we have things like games.
Right, and increasingly we're living in a world of complex systems.
Absolutely, and the more we can extract the complexity from that to understand how that data is interrelated, how those mechanics work together, we're going to do that through gameplay systems. You can't look, the amount of data is so large, you can't look at it as one lump. You have to be able to break it down into systems.
Right. And you also have to see that the systems are not given, that they're designed, that they're changeable, and
That's
that
right.
you can hack them, to new purposes too.
Absolutely. So yes, more game courses.
Thank
Yes,
you.
please.
We have the Chris Melissinos stamp of approval.
And my sister graduated from NYU, like I said, so great school, great school.
Any questions? Yeah.
Now at least, even though we still have the consoles and everything, we're starting to lose data, we're starting to lose games, and they're starting to go away. Looking at it from, I'm in an archiving program. In 100 years, when the consoles finally start to fade and go, we're gonna have to start moving these systems. Is it worth saving them if we can't play them the way we did? Is it worth still saving them, or should we just move on and leave them behind? What would you say?
That's a good question. So the question is, we're going to have problems in recreating the systems on which these games are played. J.P. Dyson from The Strong calls them our Rosetta Stones for games, right? So we have many, many Rosetta Stones that we now have to take care of because chips will eventually break, system boards break down, these sorts of things. So are they worth saving if we can't play them? So I look at it from the other side, which is that I have a very strong suspicion and a lot of faith that what winds up happening is fabrication of those broken parts to their exact degree will be nothing. It will be literally just going online and saying, all right, I need a whole new chipset for, I need a 6502 and chipsets for this board, and recreate the board. Because we have done an incredible job of one-off fabrication, it's only going to continue to move at that pace. So while we may lose some of the original systems, I believe that we're going to be able to recreate them faithfully down to the chip level with fabrication technologies that are available today. Or that are coming. And all one needs to do is take a look at things like home fabrication, right? Anyone that owns a MakerBot or have seen these things know what a MakerBot is, right? At-home 3D printers.
3D printer. Yeah.
Right? So you print a chess piece out. Well, within the span of a year and a half of the first MakerBots coming in, there was, for the same price now, a year and a half later, you have a system with two nozzles using two different types of plastics. One that's this resin base, another one that is water soluble. So it uses it as a support agent. So what winds up happening is you build this much more intricate, much more detailed piece, and you put it in water. And the other plastic falls away, and you're left with a much more detailed. So in just a year, year and a half, we already have double the resolution on 3D printers at home to make your own products. Right? It's going to explode from this point forward. And so I believe we're going to be able to recreate the systems that we need. So yes, let's save the things that are important today. Because even if the systems don't survive, the bits that we can play, we need to protect.
That, spoken like a true Star Trek nerd. You're basically...
well, I'm a Star Wars
Replicator.
guy, but replicator stuff, I'm good with that.
All right. Yeah. Dylan?
Technology has historically changed our view of art, whether it was the creation of printing, which allowed the creation of Dadaism, or whether it be the camera, which kind of gave us a new perspective. Film was born for it. Now we have video games, which is this kind of also the inclusion of the player, who could potentially be the artist that's substituted. So my question is, how do you believe video games will affect our definition of art within the coming years? And is video game the genre of our social era, or are these genres to be born forth, have the rococo's within?
Right. So I think video games, we're kind of saddled with the term because it's the only way we knew to describe them. It's video, and it is a game, therefore video games. Is it really an apt description for what video games are today? Probably not. We haven't found anything better yet, right? So is it responsive art? Right? Is it reflective art? Like these are a lot of questions that those within the games industry are asking. And as we're getting older, I talk to so many of my friends that are like, oh, I'm building this great engine, but I wish I could do this and define a new genre this way, but, I don't have time because I'm building that sort of thing. I think that as democratization of technology and tools continues at the pace it has, we're going to put these creative tools in the hands of more and more people, and what's going to come out is just this explosion of expression and art and complex systems that ultimately, hopefully, we're going to be able to figure out how to make work together. So I think we're about to hit this whole new renaissance of games and as art, because what has typically happened, as I said in the beginning of the presentation, is, or in the section of this presentation, which was the earlier systems were anemic. They could not fully articulate the full thought, like in Missile Command. Today, we no longer have those limitations. So what we're starting to see are more artists limit themselves and say, you know what, I can push realism, but I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do is restrict myself this way. Look at a game like Fez, or look at a game like Limbo, right? You could have gone one way, but no, it's choosing a particular art style and limiting yourself as an artist to create a new form of expression, right? You could have run completely out to the barriers, but they didn't. And so I think that today, there's almost no bounds to what it is you want to create. So now it's about limiting and finding new systems that can kind of collapse on themselves to create new forms of art. And the more people that we can get into programs like this and get tools into their hands, the more we're going to see that occur. I think it's great. It's the best time to be in games. It's the best time to observe them and have them part of our culture. It's only going to get better from this point forward.
Yeah.
First off, thank you for the work that you've done. I think even just hearing you talk has just really inspired me. I'm a traditional artist. I do more like illustration work, but games have influenced me. I wish I would have saw that show. I mean, it's given me goosebumps.
It's actually traveling around the country, right?
Yeah.
Where it's opened in Seattle today, I believe.
Tonight is kind of their soft open. Tomorrow they open at the EMP, and it is actually coming to the Hudson Art Museum, I think, in like another year and a half.
In the area?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to bring you back and do something.
We'll do something fun.
That.
We'll do something fun.
Awesome.
What's your question?
Here to be a part of it. I guess, coming from this awesome, broad perspective of video games, I would love to hear like what you kind of foresee as kind of what, I guess you're both hopeful with art and the video game, and also maybe like, do you have any kind of caution for us artists and game designers for the future of video games? Like what you might be fearful of.
It's good when you repeat the question. So
Sure. So the two questions are, what am I most fearful of, right?
Yeah, like maybe
not me personally, but with regard to future video games and game design.
Right, yeah.
And the first question is, the first part is,
you're most hopeful of. Like,
what am I most hopeful
you're
of?
looking forward to, or what you might perceive.
So what am I most hopeful of in terms of the way game design is occurring, and what am I most fearful of? Well, first let me get out of the way that this whole notion, there's been a lot of discussion about the video game crash. There's another video game crash coming because there's too many games. It's like saying there's too many books, there's too many movies, there's too many songs, right? It's impossible. And by the way, there was never a real crash either. For those of you that look at game history and they go, oh, the crash in 1982, the crash never happened. People just stopped playing on consoles and started playing on computers. Right? Take a look at the numbers. The crash never happened. And that's a very controversial statement within the game space.
That is an interesting point of view.
Yes. Maybe game consoles.
Right.
Kind of. I think the thing that I fear is that with the rise of what people may consider disposable entertainment, that we stopped creating. We're like, well, this is the way it's going to go, right? Apparently people are just going to buy everything for $1 and then nobody's going to want to do anything anymore. It's not the case, right? I mean, we are learning to deal with these systems. We're learning to deal with this massive deluge of information in games. There's always the threat. Every generation, for the last 3 generations of consoles, this is the last generation of consoles. It's not the last generation of consoles, right? So the thing I'm most fearful of is that we kind of look at that hard stop and go, well, there really isn't anything left to do, and but we're only going to be creating these smaller games and nobody's going to see them. We have to keep making these games. We have to continue to push the bounds of art and story and humanity and everything else in them. So my fear is that we look at it from a cursory perspective and go, it's so far afield and it's on all these other devices that we're going to stop doing it. I hope people don't. I don't think they will, but that's the one that sits in the back of my head. Hopeful is that, as a parent, where I find most of my enjoyment in playing games today are playing with my kids. We played, when my son and my middle daughter, we figured out how they could grab people in Little Big Planet. My son almost vomited. He was laughing so hard because we were just constantly yanking each other off of platforms and then hitting it, and Sackboy would go and fly. And I have this picture of them completely beat red and just laughing out loud, and the very real emotion, the very real connection that occurs there that's what I'm most hopeful for, is that we are going to continue to find systems that allow people that may have never connected before to connect to people, to find a voice, to find their place in the world. Video games have the potential to do it, because we could put these systems that break down the fear of connection, they break down the fear of interaction by giving people the ability to be who they are, right? And so I think it's incredibly wonderful in the time we're living in. And people go, oh, it's all about dude bro games. Those are things that happen in cycles, just like every other form of media does, right? So I'm just hopeful for it all, man. I love it. So I just want to keep playing.
You're an unapologetic optimist, I think.
Yeah, I love it.
So we're getting near the end, because you guys have been patient almost 2 hours. Chris has gonna have books to sign.
Yeah.
The books did come in, so maybe we'll just take one or two questions if you can.
Yeah, that's fine.
Keep the answers compact.
No
Yeah,
problem.
go ahead.
So, good.
Question about interfaces. So
Yes.
We've had buttons and keyboards and there's digital gestures and swipes and touch screens. Do you think they'll all equally occupy this space?
Right. So the question is, we have all different types of metaphors for interface, right? And different interface systems. Will they all stay? Will some fall away? So on and so forth. So it's interesting, right? When we talk about interface design, bring up Star Trek again, it's like, it's all going to be voice controlled. Oh, that'd be awesome, right? There was this guy called the Angry Video Game Nerd. I don't know if you see him, right? I love James Rolfe, and his movie's coming out this summer, which I'm excited for. And he has this one peripheral that Konami used to have, and it was a headset, and it had a thing. And what you would do is you could fire by saying fire. And he's sitting there going, fire, 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 fire. And he's like, voice control sucks. Nobody wants to do that, right?
Throat lozenge.
Exactly. But the packaging was like, so you can play in silence while other people are in the room. And he's like, how are you supposed to play in silence with people yelling fire? So, I think what happens is the control systems that we have today serve a very important purpose, which is a language of interface that everybody adheres to. So people know the placement of A and B buttons. In old Nintendo games, when they would reverse jump into action, people are like, the game's unplayable, right? Because B should always jump, I believe it is, and A always fire. And when there were several games that reversed it, people like, game sucks. Game's great game. Game sucks, can't play it, right? Because, and I challenge you to do this, if you know any young kids, ask them to ring a doorbell or press a button on an elevator, and they will all use their thumb. And most older generations will use their index finger. So we're moving further down this chain. And the reason but it causes problems, because rather than carpal tunnel, we're now creating stress in our opposable digits, right? 10 times the problem. So we have to account for that medically. We have to start understanding those systems. So I think there's going to be a place for all of these systems. Not everything falls. We are tactile beings. We need to touch. We need to have some solidity in our space to ground ourselves. So I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to continue to see that permanence of the design that's already set, continue at pace, and we're going to experiment over the top with other systems that layer onto it to make it a better experience. By the way, anyone that texts using a touchscreen, if you do it vertically, try texting horizontally and see how good you are. I bet you're not.
Yeah, let's take our last question. Go ahead.
Could you share with us the certain aspects of game design that you find particularly memorable or impactful? Just nerd out on what aspects that you love about the game that you love.
That's dangerous, asking Chris to nerd out.
No, I'm not gonna nerd out. But I will tell you, there were two games specifically I'll mention. Okay, my favorite arcade game of all time, Robotron 2084. It is a bastard of a machine and an amazing game. The balance is unbelievable. It's sublime. You get into this mode where, yeah, the first few times you play it, it's terrible because you're constantly getting, racked by it. But then you get into this
Interesting from an interface point of view too, right? No buttons.
No buttons.
Yeah, just
right. And the design was that the designer Eugene Jarvis had injured both hands during the design phase. Like, well, if you had to play, what would you do? Well, I could put a maw on this and a maw on that and do this. And so, by the way, twin sticks we have today comes directly out of Robotron, right? So any kid that plays Geometry Wars, it's like, no, play Robotron if you really want to take a beating. So, but what's great about it is that it's a simple loop, right? A simple core mechanic that continues to build on stuff. There's an elegance to the way the game plays, and it's only in going out and trying it, and it's an interface that, and a game I love to try to constantly beat and constantly play. You can never beat it, but that's the delight, right? The second one is Shadow of the Colossus. And I think what's beautiful about that game is that the discovery of the world is through the discovering the interface, right? When Wander holds up his sword and he has to rotate to focus on something, that's the directional point. There's no compass. You are actually the compass at that time. When you're approaching each one of the colossi, you have to discern exactly how to scale it. Each one communicates how they are to be tackled. The problem I had in playing the game is that these creatures have done nothing to me, and they're living out an existence that I am, basically bringing them down from a very selfish reason. The more I played that game, the worse I felt about it. And they used some very interesting cinematic techniques where after you would bring down a colossi, the camera would pull out. It would pull into 16:9 frame, and you'd watch it fall. These creatures don't just plop down. Their arms billow like this, they hit the ground, they bounce, they look you in the face, and you feel terrible. And it was there was no real instruction to it. It was press the button to do this, press the button to do that, and discover. Now go discover about this world. And I thought it was beautiful and very human in the way it presented this struggle of the character. You're at odds. You want to bring back a lost love, but why are you hurting these creatures? I think they're two games that opposite ends of the spectrum, but I love them both, and I love their interface.
I think what's beautiful about ending on that note is that, you mentioned that you don't really like the word video game, but there is something powerful if you think about the image you showed of Ralph Baer, and at that moment of creating Pong on a television screen, we took the moving image, which came through film and television, and it became participatory. It wasn't something that we passively watched, it was something that we could interact with. That's right. And that we're still kind of living in the reverberations of that moment of making our media participatory, and we're seeing it, through social media and Twitter and computing, and through games, which are also ancient, which I think is quite interesting. So I think that you talking about, how those games are personally meaningful to you, I think helps us understand the way that this cultural form resonates. And I think that we all appreciate the work that you've done with the Smithsonian to kind of help share that vision with the world. So join me in thanking Chris.
Thank you.
Melissinos.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. And gals.
Amazing talk.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.